The music pulsed through the packed nightclub, the bass vibrating in Yaron Whitaker's chest as he walked through the entrance. He had built this business from nothing, 15 clubs across the state, each one known for its high-energy atmosphere, VIP service, and exclusivity. Yet, over the last few months, things had felt off. He had received complaints about rude staff, especially the security team, and a few disturbing reports of women feeling unsafe. He had brought it up with the club's manager, but the answers were always the same: nothing serious, just drunk patrons exaggerating. Yaron wasn't buying it. So tonight, he walked into his own club as a stranger. A black hoodie, faded jeans, and a well-placed fake beard disguised the successful CEO as just another guy out for a drink. No one here had ever met him in person. He hired district managers to handle operations, and most employees only knew his name from training manuals. The line outside was long, but Yaron wasn't interested in cutting to the front. He wanted the full experience. He stood in line, watching the bouncers work. One was tall and broad, his arms crossed over his chest, while the other leaned against the railing, scanning the crowd with a bored expression. A group of young women approached, laughing and chatting as they waited their turn. That's when Yaron heard it. "Here we go again," the shorter bouncer muttered under his breath. "Another bunch of desperate chicks thinking they can get in just for looking cute." The taller one chuckled. "Yeah, and watch if they don't get in, they'll start crying about discrimination or some nonsense. Same story every damn night." Yaron's jaw tightened. The women, oblivious to the comments, handed over their IDs. The taller bouncer barely glanced at them before shaking his head. "Not tonight, ladies." One of them frowned. "Why not? We come here all the time." The shorter bouncer let out a sharp laugh. "Maybe try looking a little more VIP next time. We don't let just anyone in." A flicker of embarrassment crossed the women's faces before they turned and walked away. Their excitement dampened. Yaron's fists clenched. This was his club, his business, and this was how his staff treated paying customers. He exhaled, forcing himself to stay in character. Bursting out in rage wouldn't help. He needed to see more. When it was his turn, he handed over his ID. The taller bouncer barely looked at it before waving him through. No problem letting in a scruffy-looking man, but women who were dressed up and ready for a fun night? Denied. Inside, the club was packed. The dance floor was alive, the bar was slammed with orders, and the VIP booths were filled with people clinking glasses and laughing. Yaron moved through the crowd, keeping his eyes and ears open. At the bar, a bartender, her name tag read Penny, was juggling multiple orders at once. She worked fast, pouring drinks, swiping payments, and keeping a friendly smile despite the chaos. "One whiskey, neat," Yaron ordered. "Coming right up," Penny replied, sliding past another bartender to grab the bottle. As she poured, a man in a suit leaned over the counter. "Hey, sweetheart, how about you give me a little extra in that glass?" Penny didn't miss a beat. "Sorry, all our pours are measured." The man scoffed. "Come on, don't be difficult. I'll make it worth your while." He slid a $20 bill onto the counter. Penny picked up the bill and placed it right back in front of him. "We don't do that here. Enjoy your drink." The man's face darkened, but before he could say anything else, she had already moved on to the next customer. Yaron smiled. Someone here had standards. He took his drink and made his way toward the VIP section, scanning the staff as he walked. Most of them were working hard, rushing between tables, taking orders, delivering drinks. But then, near the back, he spotted a bouncer leaning against the wall, checking his phone instead of watching the crowd. Another group of women walked by, and Yaron caught the guy muttering something under his breath, laughing to himself. Yaron moved closer. "Look at her," the bouncer whispered to another security guard. "Trying way too hard. Bet she thinks she's the hottest thing in here." The other guy chuckled. "Yeah. And she's gonna be real disappointed when no one buys her a drink." Yaron felt his blood boil. This was beyond bad service, it was disrespect. It was toxic, and it was happening under his roof. He turned back toward the bar, spotting Penny again. She looked exhausted but kept pushing through. From what he'd seen so far, she was one of the few employees actually working hard and treating guests with respect. Yaron took a deep breath. He had seen enough for one night. Now it was time to do something about it. Yaron moved through the club with a sharper focus now, watching everything with fresh eyes. The atmosphere was electric, music pulsing, lights flashing in rhythmic patterns, but beneath the surface, cracks were forming. The staff, for the most part, worked hard under the pressure, but there were pockets of behavior that made his stomach turn. Near the bottle service area, a waitress in a sleek black uniform balanced a tray of drinks as she weaved through the crowd. A man at one of the VIP tables grabbed her wrist as she passed, causing her to stumble slightly. She quickly steadied herself, forcing a polite smile as she tried to gently pull away. The man, a heavy-set guy with slicked back hair, leaned in close to her, speaking in a low voice. Yaron couldn't hear exactly what was said, but the tension in the woman's face told him enough. She gave a short response, nodded, and turned away quickly, disappearing into the busy floor. The man just chuckled, leaning back into the cushioned booth as if nothing had happened. Yaron clenched his jaw but kept moving. He needed to see more before stepping in. At the bar, Penny was still working non-stop, but now another bartender had joined her, a guy with an easygoing demeanor, flipping bottles in the air as he prepared drinks. He was clearly trying to impress the patrons, but he kept getting distracted, chatting too much with a group of women while Penny picked up the slack. A waitress carrying an empty tray approached Penny with a frustrated look. She spoke quickly, her voice barely audible over the music, but Yaron caught a few words. Ran out of clean glasses. Again. Penny nodded, exhaling sharply before disappearing into the back. Yaron's gaze followed her. The supply issues weren't a surprise. He had noticed earlier that some drinks were being served in mismatched glassware. It was sloppy. He moved toward the back hallway, slipping past the crowd until he reached the entrance marked, "Staff Only." Normally, he wouldn't be allowed back there, but no one was paying attention. Inside, the music was muffled, replaced by the clatter of dishes and the low hum of refrigerators. Stacks of used glasses sat in plastic bins, waiting to be washed. Penny was pulling fresh ones from a storage shelf, her movements quick and precise. Then another voice cut through the quiet. "Why are you even back here? You're supposed to be at the bar." Yaron turned his head slightly without making it obvious he was eavesdropping. A man stood by the doorway, arms crossed. His shirt had the club's logo on it, one of the shift supervisors, most likely. Penny didn't stop working. "We ran out of glasses again. I told you last week we needed more stock, but nothing's changed." The supervisor scoffed. "Maybe if you weren't so slow, we wouldn't have this problem." She turned, eyes flashing with irritation. "Slow? I've been covering for Jason all night while he chats up customers. If you want someone to blame, start there." The man narrowed his eyes. "Watch your tone. You're replaceable, you know that." Yaron felt his pulse spike. Penny didn't flinch, but there was something in her posture, a slight tightening of her shoulders that told him she was holding back a response. Instead, she grabbed the crate of glasses and walked past the supervisor without another word. Yaron had seen enough. He turned and made his way back onto the main floor, his mind racing. The arrogance of some of the staff, the dismissiveness of management, the way customers were either mistreated or outright ignored, it all painted a bleak picture. And yet, there were employees like Penny busting their backs to keep things running despite the dysfunction. His next step was clear. He walked past the bar, past the VIP section, straight toward the exit. His night as an undercover guest was over. Now it was time to put an end to this mess. Yaron didn't sleep that night. By the time he left the club, his mind was overrun with everything he had seen: the blatant disrespect at the entrance, the lack of oversight inside, the way hard-working staff were dismissed while others coasted through their shifts. It was a cocktail of mismanagement, arrogance, and unchecked behavior, and it all led back to one undeniable truth: leadership had failed. And that failure was his. He had trusted the wrong people to uphold the values he built his business on. Now he had to fix it. The next night, he returned not as an anonymous patron, but as the owner. When he stepped through the entrance, the bouncers didn't recognize him at first. Yaron had shed the hoodie and jeans, opting for sharp, understated business attire. When the taller bouncer finally realized who he was, his posture stiffened. The other one, the one who had openly mocked customers the night before, looked like he had swallowed glass. Yaron didn't stop to acknowledge them. He walked past them without a word, letting the weight of his presence sink in. Inside, the club was just as packed as the night before, But now, his focus wasn't on observing. It was on taking action. The general manager, a man in his late 40s with a graying beard and a permanent air of forced confidence, was standing near the bar, chatting with a couple of VIP guests. He didn't notice Yaron at first, too busy laughing at something one of the men had said. When Yaron stopped in front of him, the laughter died instantly. The manager's expression shifted into something rehearsed, polite, but guarded. Yaron spoke before the man could launch into pleasantries. "We need to talk. Now." The manager hesitated for only a second before nodding and motioning toward the back. They walked through the club, past the bar, past the staff-only door Yaron had slipped through the night before. This time, no one questioned his presence. Inside the office, the music was a distant thrum. The manager closed the door behind them, then turned, forcing a smile. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight," he said, as if this were a casual visit. Yaron didn't sit. He remained standing, staring down at the man who had been responsible for the club's operations. "I spent last night in this club," Yaron said, his voice level but firm. "Not as the owner. Not as someone you had to impress. Just as a regular guest." The manager's smile faltered. A flicker of unease passed through his eyes. Yaron continued. "I saw bouncers turning people away for no reason. I heard them insulting customers the second they walked off. Inside, I watched employees like Penny work nonstop while others did the bare minimum. I saw security ignoring their jobs, managers belittling staff, and customers being treated like they were inconveniences instead of the reason this place even exists." The manager started to speak, but Yaron cut him off with a sharp look. "Spare me the excuses. I don't want to hear that it's normal for the industry or that I caught people on an off night. This is a pattern. It's been happening under your watch and you let it slide." The manager's shoulders tensed. "Look, You're fired." The words landed like a punch. The manager's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Yaron didn't wait for an argument. "Clear out your things. Someone will escort you out." The manager's face darkened, but he must have seen the finality in Yaron's eyes because he didn't protest. He turned stiffly, opening a drawer and pulling out a few belongings. Yaron didn't stay to watch. He had more to do. He stepped back onto the main floor, scanning the room. Penny was at the bar again, her movements just as efficient as the night before. She hadn't noticed him yet. He walked over, waiting until she turned around. When she saw him, recognition flickered across her face. "You," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You were here last night." Yaron nodded. "And I saw how hard you worked." She wiped her hands on a bar rag, studying him carefully. "You're not just a customer, are you? I own this place." Her brow lifted slightly, but she didn't look intimidated. "Just curious. I want to talk to you about what goes on here," Yaron said. "When you have a break." Penny hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. "I don't really get breaks." Yaron's jaw tightened. "You do now." She exhaled, setting down the rag. "All right, 5 minutes." They moved to a quieter corner near the service station. Yaron didn't waste time. "I saw how management treated you last night," he said. "And I saw how much you stepped up while others slacked off. I need to know, what else have you seen? What's really going on behind the scenes?" Penny crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "You sure you want the truth? That's why I'm here." She studied him for a moment before nodding. "Then here it is," she said. "The security guys, they don't care about keeping people safe. They care about who they can intimidate. The supervisors, half of them play favorites, the other half just avoid doing their jobs. The bartenders, most of them pull their weight, but a few know they can get away with slacking, so they do." She leaned slightly closer. "And the worst part? No one ever fixes it. Employees complain, but nothing changes. Guests complain, but the manager just brushes it off. So the good employees either burn out or leave, and the bad ones, they stick around because they know no one's going to hold them accountable." Yaron felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. "That changes now," he said. Penny tilted her head. "You really mean that?" "Yes." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right," she said. "Then let's see if you actually do it." Yaron respected that, because now it was time to prove that he would. Yaron didn't wait to implement changes. That same night, after his conversation with Penny, he called an impromptu meeting in the staff lounge. Employees filtered in hesitantly, some confused, others looking outright uneasy when they saw him standing at the front of the room. It was rare for the owner to be here, and even rarer for him to demand a meeting on the spot. The bouncers who had mocked customers the night before lingered near the back, their usual confidence noticeably shaken. Penny sat near the middle, arms crossed, watching everything unfold. Yaron let the weight of his presence settle before speaking. He didn't start with pleasantries or introductions. Everyone knew who he was now. Instead, he laid out exactly what he had seen the night before. The blatant disrespect toward customers, the laziness from certain staff members, the way management dismissed real concerns. He didn't sugarcoat it, didn't soften the truth. Some employees shifted uncomfortably while others nodded in silent agreement. The general manager had already been fired, but Yaron made it clear that accountability wasn't stopping there. Effective immediately, a new code of conduct was in place. Disrespect toward guests or co-workers would not be tolerated. Security staff who abused their authority or refused to take their jobs seriously would be replaced. Bartenders and servers who consistently left their teammates to pick up their slack would be reevaluated. He wasn't interested in excuses. He wanted results. One of the bouncers, the shorter one who had made crude remarks at the door, scoffed under his breath. Yaron caught it immediately. He locked eyes with the man, his tone even but firm. He wasn't asking for input. This wasn't a debate. The bouncer's posture stiffened. He didn't argue, but his defiance was obvious. Yaron had already made his decision before this meeting began. The man was done here. He addressed him directly, telling him his employment was terminated, effective immediately. The taller bouncer who had laughed along without stopping the behavior was warned one more incident, and he'd be next. The shift supervisor who had belittled Penny was next in line. Yaron didn't need to hear his side of the story. He had witnessed enough. The man tried to defend himself, claiming Penny had been out of line, but Yaron cut him off. A leader who dismissed hardworking employees instead of supporting them didn't belong in his establishment. He was out. The weight of those firings hung heavy in the air. No one spoke, but Yaron wasn't finished. He turned his attention to the employees who had been pulling more than their fair share of the workload. Penny was at the top of that list, but she wasn't the only one. The waitresses who had been dealing with entitled VIP guests without proper support, the bartenders who had been covering for their lazy coworkers, all of them deserved recognition. He didn't just offer words of appreciation. He made changes that mattered. Pay adjustments for those who had been undervalued. Promotions for employees who had proven their reliability. New security hires would be properly vetted, ensuring professionalism over intimidation. The club would no longer prioritize exclusivity over fairness. Customers who arrived in good spirits, expecting a night of fun, wouldn't be turned away because a bouncer wanted to feel powerful. The staff would be trained on proper service standards, and managers would be held accountable for enforcing them. He made one final statement before dismissing them. This wasn't a temporary fix. This was a new standard. As the employees filed out, conversations buzzed among them. Some were relieved, others still processing the sudden shift. Penny lingered by the doorway, watching him. She didn't say anything at first, just studied him like she was trying to decide if he was serious. He met her gaze steadily. She nodded once, a silent acknowledgement. Yaron knew this wasn't the end of the work to be done. Culture didn't change overnight. But tonight, he had taken the first step in making sure his club was a place of respect not just for customers, but for the employees who actually made it run. The next few weeks were relentless. Yaron wasn't just making policy changes from a distance, he was embedded in the club's daily operations. Every night, he walked the floor, watching, listening, ensuring that the reforms he had put in place weren't just words but actions. The tension that had hung over the staff after the firings gradually shifted. Some employees who had coasted before realized they had no choice but to step up or leave. A few quit on their own, unwilling to adapt to the new expectations. Yaron let them go without hesitation. He wasn't interested in dragging along dead weight. With the gaps left behind, he worked closely with his hiring managers to bring in new talent bartenders, servers, and security personnel who understood that professionalism wasn't optional. The new head of security had a background in hospitality and de-escalation techniques, ensuring that the intimidation tactics of the past wouldn't return. Penny remained skeptical at first. Yaron could see it in the way she measured him each time he showed up, her sharp eyes assessing whether his commitment was real or just temporary posturing. But as she watched the changes take shape, her wariness gave way to something else, cautious optimism. One night, as she finished a particularly grueling shift, she leaned against the bar, rolling the stiffness from her shoulders. Yaron was nearby, speaking with a new floor manager about service flow when she approached him. She didn't waste time with small talk. 3 weeks in and nobody's been thrown under the bus yet, she said. That's a first. Yaron caught the edge in her voice, more observation than accusation. Because I meant what I said, he replied. If people do their jobs, they're supported. If they don't, they're held accountable. She exhaled, her expression thoughtful. Still not used to seeing an owner actually care what happens on the floor. Yaron knew she wasn't the only one who felt that way. The club's previous leadership had been distant, treating the place as a revenue stream rather than a workplace filled with real people. That culture had been embedded for years, and undoing it wouldn't happen overnight. But he wasn't backing down. The biggest test of the new structure came on a Saturday night, when the club was at capacity. The VIP section was booked solid. The dance floor was packed, and the bartenders were moving at breakneck speed. It was the kind of high-pressure environment where old habits could resurface, but Yaron was watching. He was near the entrance when a situation unfolded. A group of women approached the door, dressed for the night, laughing as they checked their IDs. The new head of security, Marcus, greeted them professionally, scanning their credentials without issue. Then, from the side, a familiar voice cut in. A former bouncer who had been let go, one of the worst offenders, was standing just beyond the ropes, talking to one of the newer security hires. His posture was relaxed, but his words were anything but. Back in my day, we didn't let just anyone in, he said, his tone casual but laced with condescension. You let in too many of them, and next thing you know, the vibe's all wrong. The younger bouncer hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. Yaron didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, placing himself directly between the former employee and the entrance. You don't work here anymore, he said evenly. So you don't make the rules. The man gave a half laugh as if trying to play it off. Relax, I was just saying. You were saying exactly what got you fired in the first place, Yaron interrupted. And if you think that attitude is welcome here, you're wrong. Marcus, the new head of security, stepped up beside him, his presence alone sending a clear message. The former bouncer's bravado faded quickly. Without another word, he turned and walked off into the night. When Yaron turned back toward the entrance, the group of women was still there, watching. One of them, a woman with dark curls and a sharp gaze, studied him for a moment before nodding in approval. Didn't expect that, she said. Nice to see someone actually care. Yaron gave a curt nod, then stepped aside as Marcus welcomed them in. Inside, the energy of the club felt different, not just because of that moment, but because of everything that had been shifting over the past few weeks. The staff moved with purpose, the new hires blended seamlessly with the veterans who had embraced the changes, and the atmosphere was one of enjoyment rather than unease. Penny, watching from the bar, caught his eye and raised an eyebrow as if to say, not bad. It wasn't just about fixing a few bad apples. It was about rebuilding the foundation. And for the first time in a long time, Yaron felt like the business he had built was finally reflecting the values he had always intended it to have.